Let's talk about our dog class right now. Right now, when I'm down here, I'm instantiating this new dog. I'm creating a new dog instance. So at this point, I'll have an object of type dog. And then I'm using these public properties to set the name and the age. And that's okay. But a lot of the times, we know we're always going to set a name and we're always going to set an age for any dog that we create. When we construct this class new, we should be able to feed in, and we can, 2 parameters, name and age. So I'm going to get rid of this. Let's go ahead and make this work. And so this is what we're going to aim for right here. I'm going to come back to my class, dog. There is a special method that's on every single class, and it's called a constructor. And there's another one called a destructor, and we'll talk about that in a second. But there is a function that we can always call. It's construct. This is called no matter what we do. And this function is called as we are creating this object. And just to show that, I'm going to call echo, we'll say we're constructing right there. Let's misspell construct, just like that. And I'll put the BR after it so we have our line breaks. So here's my constructor. And right now, I'm going to go ahead and just remove these because I don't want it to break yet, but I do want to show that constructor is being called. And I'm going to refresh our page. And it looks like I couldn't avoid a fatal error, but let's go ahead and do a couple things. First of all, I'm going to clean this up. I don't need that feed code anymore. And then let's come back up to the constructor. What this is complaining about is that inside of my dog, when I call dog speak, I'm actually accessing this name. But this name has never been assigned a value. So if I want this to work, what I can do is I can assign it a value. This is like hard coding a value. And then I could assign age a value. And again, this is hard coding these values. And we wouldn't want to do this because every dog isn't named Fred and every dog isn't named age. But just to show that this constructor is being called, let's hard code those in for now. And you can see it says construct. And this is called as part of the new operator. So when I new up a class, we call this constructor. There's also a function that's called destruct. And this is called whenever a class is no longer being used and it goes out of scope, PHP will do the garbage collection on that object and it will destruct that object. And we'll talk about why or when you can use destructors and constructors in a second. But let's go ahead and refresh this page. And here you can see we construct it as part of the new. We call speak and it says Fred says whimper whimper because it's hungry. We can see the object itself. And then the script ends, and PHP goes through a garbage collection process, and it knows what objects exist, and it calls destruct on all those objects. All right, so let's cover why I would use a constructor. In this case, we're going to fix this issue where we've got these names hard-coded. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the hard-coded values here. We don't need those. But what I'd rather do is in the constructor, let's feed the name in, and let's feed in an age. And with that, then I can set the name and set the age equal to whatever the values are that we fed in when we constructed this. Now my constructor takes 2 parameters. One is a string and one's a float. If I come down here, I didn't provide any parameters, and you can see my IDE is complaining a little bit. But let's go ahead and run this because it's instructive to see what errors you would get. And here you can see it's uncaught argument count error. So there's not enough arguments going into this constructor. 0 were passed in. So here, this was Fred, and I believe it's 2.5 years old. So let's go ahead and feed that in. And you can see my ID is already showing me that this parameter is associated with the name, and this one's associated with the age. So if I run it now, it goes through the constructor where it takes my 2 parameters, Fred and age, and it sets them. So now you can see the name is set to Fred. You can see age is set to 2.5. And then it calls a destructor when the script is all done. At this point, if you think about our class, there's not really a need for us to ever change the name. Normally, when you name a dog Fred, after a year, you're not going to get bored of it and then change its name. Given that logic, we should make the name private. Now my IDE is rearrange these variables, and this is a good habit to get into. Always put your public properties on the top and your privates on the bottom. Same thing with methods. You can see all the public. The ones that are exposed are on the top, and I don't have any private methods here, but generally you would put the private methods down below the public methods. And the reason that is because generally if I want to get a real quick glimpse of what the footprint of this class is as a developer. I just have this class. I want to be able to quickly see these public properties, and I want to quickly see the public methods. And I also want to see how to construct one of these things. So I'm going to rerun this. So nothing's really changed except for now we have this name property that is now private. Now for now, we're leaving age as public because presumably there's not really a way to update the age at this point. But we could easily make this private. In that case, I probably would just bump it down. I feel like age is after name. And then down here, at maybe around here, we can have a method that is happy birthday. And what it's going to do is it's just simply going to take your age and increment it by 1. So to create a dog, we're feeding in the float of that age. And to be honest, there's some goofy things with this that I don't really like, because right now we could feed in 2.5, and then when its birthday comes along, now all of a sudden it's 3.5 as opposed to just 3. So ideally what we would do is instead of the age, we would feed in its birth date, and then we could automatically compute the age. And we might do that as a later option, but for now, I'm just going to leave this the way it is. So we feed in an age. Whenever it has a birthday, we call this method called happy birthday, and it increments the age by 1. And if I don't like how that's incremented by 1, what I could do is I could feed into it the happy birthday as a current age, and then I could just reset the age to whatever the current age is. So on the birthday every year, I call this function with its current age, and then I update the age. So at this time, all of these properties are all private. So if I rerun this again, we can see name, age, and food are all private properties now. So let's talk about this destructor or this destruct method. There are a number of times when you have a class that's going to interact with maybe external resources. And those external resources, in order to interact with them, you have to initially connect to them. And then before you leave, you should close that connection. And so this is where we would use constructors and destructors. I'm not going to code this out, but here you would connect to external resources. Think about this as maybe it's a database connection. And I have that connection now available to use, but it's a live connection. And I don't want this class to go out of scope and that connection isn't closed properly. When I say closed properly, sometimes if we don't close things down properly, we might lose data or we might lose resources. Eventually, the database would probably realize that that connection has timed out and it'll reclaim it itself. But again, there may be unsaved or unstored data that we really should close this down properly. And that's what the destructor allows us to do. So here we would close any external connections. And again, think about that database. We're going to save any data that might need to be saved, and then we're going to close it. In another example, maybe it's not a database connection, but maybe this is a logger class. So right away in the beginning, we might open a file for logging. So we're able to write to this file. And then as we use this logger class, maybe we're logging lines to it, but we don't log every line right away. We might cache those in kind of a local memory, so it's in the memory of the class. But before this class closes, I definitely want to write any data that hasn't been written, write cached data to the file, and then I also want to then close the file. That's an example of where I probably need a destructor. I would open up this file for writing right in the constructor. Every time you send the class a log statement, I would cache it locally, maybe in an array. And then every once in a while, when that array reached a certain size, I could write it to the log file. But then I may have a couple of lines in there that I haven't reached the size yet. I don't want those being lost when I destruct this thing. So I could write those cached lines to the file and then close the file in the destructor. So those are two very important methods, and those are always available in your PHP classes.